This podcast is brought to you by Optimizer's Mass Zines product. Watch the video at the end of the podcast for more details.
Welcome to the Deepak Saini Show.
Welcome to the Deepak Saini Show. I'd like to thank J23 for the intro music. You can find a link to our music in the show description. My guest today is Shishkin. Kira is the CEO of informed.now, the #1 news-by-SMS service in America. He's a 4-time serial entrepreneur and investor in the technology industry. Kira is a Ukrainian-Israeli immigrant to the US with a global experience spanning investment banking, corporate strategy, venture capital, and private equity. He was in Forbes 30 under 30. And if you see, he won't tell me his age, people. I asked him and he won't tell me. I think he might only be 15. I'm not sure. I'm just joking, of course. Kira, welcome to the Deepak Saini Show.
Deepak, I just turned 17. Thank you for having me.
Oh, awesome. Awesome. You can drive now.
Yeah.
No, we're just joking, folks. I really appreciate being on the show. And I always like to start with this kind of opening question, and feel free to go as far back as you want or not, but, what got you into, this line of work and, why you're so passionate about it. And again, feel free to go as far back as you want or not.
Totally. Well, if I was to describe, for the listener, what my work is today, it is fighting against this huge force of a misinformation overload. We call a combination of misinformation and information overload that come to characterize our media landscape, our media ecosystem that we inhabit in North America, but also all around the world. And it really comes back to my upbringing. So I was born and raised in Kiev, in Ukraine, the capital of Ukraine, to a family that was, second generation, first generation immigrants from Russia, transitioning in their identity in a transitioning world. Then I kind of came of age, spent my young adulthood in Israel, where also a lot of things are in a constant pivot before coming to the United States and then seeing the United States change a lot over the time that I've been here, from all the way from 2016 into what it is now, 10 years later, a United States in motion, United States in transition. And so across all those environments, I just saw again and again the same story, which is the everyday person doesn't have access to facts. They only have access to stories and commentary of those stories and to perspectives and opinions. But it's been very difficult for the everyday Canadian, the everyday American, in North America broadly, because we serve the United States and Canada. It's been very hard to just be informed without being influenced. And so that gave the animating spirit to my mission today with informed.now.
It's a very interesting perspective. I've heard you say, or maybe I read it somewhere about, kind of reclaiming that attention span in the age of attention terrorism. I don't know if that was a coin you term per se, but I've heard that read, and I think we're having this conversation very pertinent at the time of recording. Obviously there's, I don't know how many active wars going on, at the time of this recording. The USA has just started a campaign against Iran. You grew up in Kiev. Obviously there's conflict ongoing in Ukraine right now. With that perspective and that unique experience and background that you have, I imagine this is just even more so important what you're trying to do, your mission now. It's getting more and more important every day, probably, right?
That's right. Right. It always started out as personal. It always started out as very high stakes, and how personal and how high stakes has not faded. Right. It's every day continues to be critical for people to be able to understand, to be able to be aware of what's going on around them in an effective way, in a way that doesn't derail you, doesn't trigger you, and doesn't require you to do hours of research every day when you've got other things to do in your life, right? So I think, to your point, it's never been more important to be informed, and yet it's never been more difficult, right? And so we're looking to make it worthwhile, make it accessible, make it easier for the everyday person who's busy, who has other things to do, whose job isn't to triangulate news, right? Triangulate information about current affairs. How can we make it easy for the person to keep up with the chaos and the pivots and the changes and the transitions that the world is constantly going through?
No, I'm a firm believer, and I love your opinion on this. And regardless of where someone sits on a political spectrum or ideological spectrum, right? They tend to, self-reinforce their own beliefs. They listen to this type of media, or they listen to this type of media over here. And I believe, and 100% happy to debate this with you, that the truth is somewhere in the middle. It's on neither polar ends. It's somewhere in the middle. And like you said, the everyday person certainly doesn't have time to wade through all that. Most everyday person, and certainly not high performing leaders and founders and executives and et cetera, or leaders of any sort. They have even less time to sort of do that. Do you feel that that's the primary kind of objective, is to sort of filter out that noise to like give a nice balanced perspective?
I think it's very important that you bring that up because I don't disagree with you in any way. So I don't think it would be a debate. It would be more of an exploration of how do you get to sort of like the core truth. And we have a slightly contrarian approach to it, because we find that even the way you're describing this issue, you're describing it in terms of a person that is consuming. I mean, all of us are, right? Consuming information that is basically being forced one way or another. And to find the truth, you have to kind of marry those two perspectives, bring them together, and figure out, okay, what is the thing that they agree on before there is the spin to the left or spin to the right or spin up or spin down, right? And that's just been the way people have been triangulating the truth up until now. But that requires them to read the news twice. If not twice, it requires them to read the news 3 times, maybe even more, to find out what is this like a common agreement point that seems to be valid across the ideological reporting spectrum. And we believe that the everyday person doesn't have time to read the news twice, doesn't have the bandwidth to read the news even more than once. Most people don't find the time, don't make the time to even read the news once. Forget about twice. That's for the news junkies. And so what we believe in is, what if, our whole kind of experiment with informed.now is, what if you could just read the news for 30 seconds a day? If you had this, artificial restriction on your life, Deepak, you can't read the news for more than 30 seconds a day. It's restricted. It's not allowed. But you can't do that research, which is obviously, I'm describing it as an artificial kind of, experimental, but that's actually the constraint of most people's lives. Most people's life, whether they're driving Uber or leading a multinational enterprise, right? They are constrained in terms of time always, in terms of their attention always. So what we do is we condense the information to such a minimalism, to such a brevity, such that what we report on is so brief, it's essentially bullet points. It's intentionally, in bullet point format, that it is, so to speak, the base kind of truth, because there isn't enough space to layer in commentary. There isn't the space to say, here's what happened and here's why it's terrible. Here's what happened and here's why it's the best. Because we just say, here's what happened, when it happened, where it happened, and maybe the immediate context surrounding it, but there isn't a suggestion of how you should feel about it. And in some ways, we describe this as not being 1x the quantity of news, but being 0.1x the quantity of news,
Right.
Instead of 2 or 3x.
And I'm just curious, who thus far, and I know you're like a growing company, but thus far, who seems to be the biggest uptake of users? Is it a certain demographic, or men, women, what have you?
Totally. We lean a little bit female. Doesn't really, it's not because of our go-to-market efforts in any way, just we're slightly more female than male. And we have sort of 3 archetypes that are emerging. We're in our 2nd year of operating, and here's kind of what we're seeing. there is the frustrated millennial, the person who has, gone through their formative years in the age of social media becoming the default mode of communication, default mode of attention wielding. And they're very frustrated. And frustrated is a euphemism for how they feel. And they're looking for a no BS, no noise solution. And so that's like archetype number one, right? And it ranges across income levels, ideologies, geographies all around North America, around who that person is more demographically. But psychographically, kind of like generationally, like that's the frustrated millennial archetype. We also have what we call the enlightened Gen Z, somebody who is on the younger side, and they're just getting into reading news. They're just getting into caring about what's going on around them, right? Getting their head out of the gutter and figuring out, okay, well, I want to get a job, or okay, I want to know what's going on in the world. And they, from the beginning, have a really high BS filter. They really cannot stand being manipulated. They cannot stand seeing bias. They have an allergy to it that is inherited from the millennials, but is amplified through the option choice that they have. And so they are also big users. And the third is a smaller category, is folks from the Gen X, even to a boomer era, which are folks that have just seen so many ages of history turn by now. In America, they've seen a lot of eras in the time that they've lived. They have the experience to say, like, gosh, I can't trust anything anymore. And instead of being disillusioned, they are still seeking, they're still open to solutions. It's sort of like an open-minded Gen X and boomer that I'm describing. And they also are big fans. Does
I
that
would
help kind
say,
of,
I
yeah,
fall into that third category, and I would say, just as a commentary, we don't have to dwell on this, but that second category, you said, they're the kids of my generation, right? So I think we've passed down some of that frustration, some of that, our own BS meter to our kids, and I think they've inherited that. I'm going to speak for myself or my own family. I don't. That's what I'm thinking that, and my friends and their kids. But I think there's probably some truth to that.
yeah,
Um, so I imagine that, and please fact check me here. I imagine that, providing your service, you're using, I'm just, for the audience, I'm just going to use like a blanket term of AI tools, or large language models, et cetera, to filter down to your bullet points. So I'd love for you to just explain that a little bit, but more so the question really is, in this age of information and or maybe even misinformation, where do you see the role of AI and then your company in maybe this emerging role of AI?
of course. Well, I would say, we do use a lot of tools. We are very technological. We are, and if you're not using tools to expand your capacity, to read more, to digest more, to be able to analyze more, then you're gonna fall behind. Any media company that's not using modern tools, it's like being a Neanderthal and coming to a campfire and saying, "Hey guys, you're not using fire? Like you should really try it. Fire's good." Right. So it's one of those things that it's in a few years and already a fundamental tool that is just synonymous with software and synonymous with technology. But we're using a lot of that. But I don't like to say that, like, oh, we just, click a button and things happen and we can't control, we don't understand anything. It's not like that at all. We're very technologically enabled, but ultimately our mechanism is a research approach. And technology enables that approach. It doesn't define it and it doesn't overwhelm it. The approach that we use is called OSINT. OSINT is short for open source investigation. And I believe it was coined by the CIA and the FBI in the United States to triangulate publicly available information to find out what is unknown and find out like what can be known based on a mess of information out there. And so we use that OSINT, open source intelligence approach, and that's what we train our team on. That's what we hire. That's the skills we hire for, is research skills, not journalism, not reporting. Although we leverage and honor that work from others, we think of ourselves as news researchers.
Sure.
And so there's a lot of AI, there's a lot of software that enables us to expand our readership, to read more, to monitor a larger volume of news 24/7. But I wouldn't say that we're just a button clicking AI company or using some black box that we can't control. All our technology is purpose built for our very specific use case of news research, and we take full responsibility for the content, right? So when you're seeing, a message from us, you know that it's something you can trust because we put our whole reputation of our brand behind it every single day. This is not something that is use at your own risk, or you have to double check it. That's using ChatGPT for you, right? That's
Right.
using Perplexity for you. With us, you get the expanded capacity of technology company with the ultimate credibility of the media company.
So going back a little bit further in our conversation, you're just reporting the facts. This happened. Maybe I'll get off of war and politics for a second. Okay, we just had the Olympics just finished. Like at the time of this recording, the Olympics just wrapped up a few weeks ago. So a fact would be XYZ person from this country won gold medal in this event. So that's great. We're just providing the facts in bulletproof form, like you said, keeping out the biases and the noise that other platforms, other media has. Now, what if someone like myself is like, oh, I don't really care about the Winter Olympics, but I care about NFL football or Formula One racing. Is there some like algorithm or some customization to what comes into my feed, or is it kind of standard?
Yeah. I think it's important to note we've struggled with this question since the beginning of our existence: is how much do we want to personalize for our reader? And we really found that at the risk of running the most effective echo chamber in the world, we don't want to give complete personalization control to the end user, meaning that you can't, to the finest detail, customize exactly what you're seeing. If you want a highly personalized solution, you always have social media, you always have Apple News, Google News. They'll come with the noise, come with a high price point, all these subscriptions and the noise. But there are other ways to personalize your feed, so to speak. The way we position ourselves is news for people who hate news for people who have no time. And so what we filter on is significance. And we have a whole philosophy around what that means. And when you're subscribing to Informed, you are subscribing to our worldview around what is significant and what is not significant. And you don't intentionally, we don't offer like fine-grained personalization of curating what your feed is. We believe there are plenty of other solutions that do that, and that it's not sort of an area where help is needed, where our help is needed. And so the way it looks is the way we prioritize significance is at a scale of large action. What does that mean? It means that we're not reporting on local accidents, right? If there's a bus crash in Alberta, it's a terrible thing, but it's a local accident. And there are better places to learn about that than through informed.now. We focus on things that are affecting millions of people necessarily. That's the scale of change that we're looking at, and that are changing their life. What does that mean, changing their life? Meaning it's changes in their freedom, in their security, in their safety, in their optionality, in their economic, cultural, health, social condition, and that is fundamentally changing the lives of many families, households, and millions of people at a scale that you can't afford not to know these things. You can't not
So
know
sorry to
them
interrupt,
because
but so
they're
like a big weather event, like wildfires across California, or some big cold front that shut off the power grid, that will still make the
yeah,
news because it's impacting, like you said, millions, multiple states potentially, or a large city or what have you. Yeah.
exactly. It needs to be at a very large scale. So like weather warnings generally don't make it, but if it's a historic tycoon, it's a historic snowstorm that has like not been seen before, unprecedented in Canada for the last 30 years, it's definitely going to make it, right? I think a word that we look for a lot is unprecedented. Like we're looking for unprecedented changes or historic changes that are shaking what people expect from their environment, from their economy, from their politics, from their culture. And so that's sort of the scale that we seek to sort of report on. Exactly.
Got it. Understood. I'm gonna switch gears a little bit here. I said it in the bio. You had, four-time, entrepreneur, I think in some different industries. Maybe, reflect on what it was like building those companies, what you learned from each one. More importantly, like, some of the failures and what you learned from those failures. The audience would love to hear some of that.
Totally. Gosh, it's they were really quite different industries. My first project, my first venture was, I mean, this one has more in common with Informed than others, perhaps, but it was publishing books, and we were publishing academic books because um, I felt that American history, when I say American history in the context of the United States, it means like United States history, essentially, was told in a very confusing way. It was taught, and I'm curious if you have the same feedback for Canadian history, but United States history has been taught in themes, not in a chronology. And that made it really hard for a lot of people at high school level. This was high school level uh, academic publishing. It was very hard for them to figure out, like, okay, are we in a Western expansion or antebellum, postbellum? What time are we in? What's the chronology of these events? Because they're told in these large themes, these stains on a timeline. And so we created a book, and we published multiple that taught American history to high school level students in a way that was much more chronological.
That's interesting.
Um, yeah, it was a kind of a clever idea, nothing genius, but it was just a new way to learn United States history.
Yeah, I'll commentary on that. You kind of opened the door for me to jump in here. So I'll say, a little bit hard for me to remember my high school. That was quite some time ago, but my kids are going through it right now. My oldest is in high school now, and I'm going to speak for Canada in general because it's pretty much consistent. It's very theme based. So in grade X, you learn this, this, and this when it comes to history or social studies, we call it here. And then in the next grade, you learn this and this. And it could be jumping all around the world timeline for sure. And I'm not saying we shouldn't know about, again, I'm just using Canada as an example because this is where I live. Not saying we shouldn't know about Canadian history, but Canada is a very young country, right? Like less than 200 years old. There's other places in the world, Europe, et cetera, where like very rich histories, like we should probably learn a little bit about, and just not World War I and World War II. Like, we should learn about some of the other things. And I think it's pretty, and I understand, and going through high school or from even primary school through high school, like there's only so much time dedicated to that one subject because you got to learn math and everything else as well. So I get it. You can't cram in the world history in, a few hours. But it seems to be very specific. And who made that decision? Somebody somewhere made the decision with this entire province or the whole country is going to learn in grade 8. Random, right? That's always been a bone. As a parent, that's been a bone in my thing. And then the other part that maybe I'd love for you to get Tom Troy on, obviously, forget who said this originally, but, history is written by the victors, right? So I think you have a very, certainly here in North America, a very Americanized view of world events. And I love documentaries that, show like a different angle. I watched one recently, Netflix, I can't remember the name now, but, kind of the Cold War, but, give perspective from like the Russian side and other European countries as opposed to just, let's say, North American or American side. So I love
Yeah,
your take on that, like just like history or anything we learn in general, like who put it out there? Because they always have an agenda or a bias, right? Like I think it
totally.
ties back to our the conversation with informed.
100%, right? It's like bias is unavoidable um, as soon as you go beyond the bullet points, right? It's like, we think about this a lot, obviously. Like we are an anti-bias company, so to speak. So we think a lot about like when is bias unavoidable? When is it, you know, inevitable? And how do you get rid of it? And the only answer that we've been able to sort of articulate, and it goes back obviously to the way history is written too, is the length of the text. It's bias is unavoidable past a certain threshold of word count, right? It's like if you just say, hey, this year World War II started, right? No bias here. We know what's going on. This makes sense. This is factual. We all agree, right? But then the next sentence says, oh, it started, in this country or between these two countries. So, okay, yeah, this makes sense. And then as you keep adding every sentence, you are increasing the capacity for saying something that is no longer commonly agreed upon, commonly understood by the victors and the losers,
Right.
by all those many different sides. And it's funny because you're making me reflect on that first venture. We had the same perspective of informed that we have now, which is how do we give you the essentials such that you can make up your own mind, can make up your own commentary around what happened, but you're basing off of a set of facts that you can trust instead of facts being, shrouded with a lot of other commentary that may have an agenda and almost inevitably always has an agenda. So I think in some ways this was a very making me like reflect on this as
Yeah,
a venture leading up to
I've
this.
a venture. Obviously you're 2 years in and you got a lot of runway to go here. But let me just plant the seed for your fifth venture is blending the two. So like history books, that's like bullet point form of like just the world facts of like
Yeah.
all major world history, across all continents and stuff. Anyway, I'll just plant that seed with
It's
you, and you can do what you want with it.
it's funny you mentioned that because I really do think of, I think back to our initial project. So that whole venture was called American Chronology. And I think back to American Chronology as a like what we're doing now with Muse is history. It is just very modern, like
Yeah, sure.
contemporary history, but it's going to be history within a couple of years. And so, in some ways, we're already writing the American chronology, so to speak, of the the current times, right? Because looking back 5 years, looking back 10 years, all of our work will become sort of a documentation of what every day has changed the world. That's kind of one of our frameworks. Is the way we describe our work is we focus on world changing world news, and we focus on what changed the world in the last 24 hours every day. And so we have this kind of chronicle of what is it that's changing the world every 24 hours, such that people can be aware, people can be informed, people can make decisions. But if you look at that retroactively, that's a history book. That's a very essential, history book without the commentary. And I think we're missing those things in our culture.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's a very good point. I kind of took us down a side angle there for a second, but I'd love to come back to like your second and third venture, what those look
Yeah,
like and challenges and
totally.
you had and what you learned from those challenges.
Yeah, yeah. So second and third were a little bit different in terms of, so American Chronology and informed.now have a lot in common. My first and fourth and current venture. The second and third had I think more maybe in common with each other. The second venture was around uh, the Ethereum network in the world of crypto, and this idea of creating an ecosystem that can work without trust, that can work, that trust is embedded in the infrastructure of financial transactions, embedded in the infrastructure and documentation, I guess, in the history books of a new way of transacting value, transacting payments. And so that was a crypto infrastructure project that we ran for many years since 2016, and frankly until just a few years ago. It was a very successful business, but it was hard to feel the impact, like tangibly, personally, right? With selling books to high schools, we felt the kids learning. We saw it. We saw the impact. With Informed.now, we are interacting with our users every single day. We can see the impact. For me, with that operation from 2016, it was harder. It was more anonymous. It was much more community, but like very, you faceless.
Yeah,
And that was
I
a little
totally
bit
understand.
hard.
Part of those communities before
Yeah.
too. I totally understand what you're saying there. Yeah.
But it was an amazing venture. It's definitely built a lot of financial stability and a lot of financial runway for next projects. And then my third venture was actually got headhunted into running a project, running an endeavor within an enterprise environment at a big company that's active in Canada, active in the United States, active around the world, called Intuit.
Hmm.
And it was me and a couple of other team members. We were tasked with solving a problem in one of the businesses that wasn't growing. And so the way we answer that problem is actually by incubating a company. We raised $30 million to build kind of a net new business unit. And we built from nothing into big something, a multi-sided marketplace that made it easier for taxpayers to do taxes, everyone's big pain in the butt, and for tax professionals to run their business and operationalize their business in a way that doesn't cost their mental stress and doesn't cause any mental anguish. We create a marketplace environment that has become very successful and is now known as TurboTax Full Service around North America. And that was a really
Very,
kind
very
of
familiar with
rich
that.
experience.
So,
Yeah.
I was just going to say too, I guess we're in 26 now. Last year, I had a coaching client who worked for a subsidiary of Intuit, and I won't get into that details, but very, very, very familiar with that. No, very, very interesting, and I can see how you kind of only touched about. I'm just going to push back a little bit. Like, what is the casual listener who maybe is kind of like listening or watching and kind of doing something else, they might not have picked up on it. Because you did say some challenges along the way, but I'd really like, what is like one maybe really like any one of the 4 businesses thus far that's like, this was a big learning experience, and we grow so much more because we went through that experience.
Totally. Gosh, I mean, there's so many lessons, right? There's no shortage of lessons. I'll just name a couple, right? For me, the American Chronology business, it was the right spirit. It was not scalable in a way that I wanted it to be, in a way that I want my impact to be. And so that was like a big learning, is how do we create a system that can affect change, not on a scale of hundreds, but on a scale of hundreds of thousands. That was sort of a big learning. It was the first business. Scalability is not obvious to a young person. And that was a big learning. And there were so many others. I'm just naming one. I'll just name one of each, right? From the crypto infrastructure project, it was an absence of a felt impact. I hinted at that earlier. It's just like, I didn't feel like I was helping people. I know that I was, and I know that I was creating value for the ecosystem, for the community. I was doing something good, but it didn't feel clear enough almost to me. And I needed it to be. Like, I needed the impact to be felt by the end user, and I needed the impact to be felt from me as someone who's working on it. I need to feel motivated like that. And I found that to be less motivating. I think a big learning from the TurboTax project and into it is we had a really big team. We had a 5-6 person kind of founding team. We were all doing different roles, and it enabled us to go very far and very quick because we were able to do things at the same time. I was the CEO of the MVP, and we had folks that were doing more things on the strategy side, more things along the operations side. We were able to have really broad bandwidth, and we had obviously the resources of an enterprise. But coming out of that experience, I am now a solo founder with informed.now, learning that actually it's a different type of speed. I'm able to go faster in many ways when I go alone. And so leveraging that experience and the knowledge, I'm actually preferring to sort of build on my own terms and my own timeline, rather than being a little bit held back by a larger team structure and by a co-founder cohort almost, right?
Sure.
And so it's more of a learning around, I personally go fast and go far individually.
Okay. No, I love that answer. And I think that's a great segue as we kind of slowly come to a wrap here. Being, the sole founder and obviously a growing company, having, a lot of previous success in the past. Obviously you're a fairly young man still, but I'm just wondering, what does, how do you maintain that? How do you maintain your energy, your health? Like, do you have like a morning routine, or there's some non-negotiables for your health that are just, like you have to get in, or like, what does that look like? Share that with the audience.
Yeah. I have a weird set of rules for myself, and they're not really rules, right? They're just things that over time my preferences have leaned this way, and I've honored that, and I've sort of crystallized it into rules, but they only sound like rules when I verbalize them, when I live by them, they just sound like my natural preferences. I don't drink alcohol, and I haven't had a drink in a really long time, maybe 6, 7 years of not drinking anything, or sometimes holding a glass at a cocktail party, but I generally don't consume alcohol. I don't also consume coffee. I think alcohol and coffee are very easy. They're within reach. Our culture pushes them down on us
Sure.
with a lot of pressure. I don't drink alcohol. I don't drink coffee in any form. I don't even drink caffeinated tea. So those are some things I swear by. I think they create a lot of clarity in my mind. I don't. I try not to eat unhealthy food, and that's a pretty high bar for what that is. Like I try to eat a lot of salads. I try to eat things that are obviously healthy. I don't try to like consume things that are in the gray area, right? Sometimes there's a lot of cheat meals, but I generally try to eat healthy, like extremely healthy. And I try to avoid sugar, like in a very, very meaningful way. I think these things sound like, oh, these are such small dietary restrictions, but they're not. They have direct impact on how you feel. They have a direct impact on
100%. Preaching
how
to
you
the choir
think.
here for sure. But yeah,
Right, right.
absolutely. Yeah.
I know I am, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So no coffee, no alcohol, no sugar, and always erring on the side of being really healthy. I feel like I sleep pretty well. I think it's more of I'm lucky to have always been sleep deprived. So anytime I go to sleep, I have a really good rest because my body's always demanding it anyway. But I try to get 6, 7 hours is not enough for me. Like I kind of need more like 8, maybe even 9 sometimes. And I push myself a lot through the rest of the day. So I need the 8, 9 hours pretty consistently. Um, I'll stop here.
What does exercise look like for you? Or do you do anything
That's
structured
yeah.
or
That's one of my biggest misses, honestly. Deepak is I wish I had more exercise in my life. I wish I found and made more time for exercise. These days, I do some very essential like calisthenics of some push-ups, some I think they're called burpees, which sounds like a weird word, but I do like the very basic calisthenics exercises, pull-ups. But I've been missing fitness from my life in a more structured way. That's one of
yeah,
the things I'm working on.
yeah, well, it's good to have something. So you got lots of things already dialed in, so that's awesome. And I love those things you said. And sleep obviously very important. And I'll just share this little tidbit with you and with the audience. I did post it maybe 3 or 4 months ago, but last summer I went to Europe and no access to gyms and that sort of thing. And all I did, I kind of I run little experiments on myself all the time. So just basically when I didn't have access to a gym like 3 weeks straight and other periods in this experiment plan. All I did was push-ups, just did like
Mm,
push-ups to failure, like every day. No access to a
mm,
gym. I'm not traveling to Europe with like portable equipment and blah blah all this kind of stuff. And I actually put on lean muscle mass over this experimental period. And that's even with indulging a little bit throughout Europe. I was in Germany and Austria and like beers. That's just kind of culturally and that sort of thing, which I don't drink that kind of stuff at home. So I was actually basically proof with the right intention and a few tactics you can still improve your body composition, even not that everything is ideal. So no, I love those answers.
I mean,
One. Go ahead.
to hear that you've gained lean muscle mass despite the indulgences of Europe is very impressive.
Pretty intentional about it. So I appreciate that. Yeah, yeah. Maybe I'll drop a link to that article in the show notes here. Speaking of which, all the links for informed.now and all the links that you and your team have shared, we'll have it in the show notes there as well. I think you have a gift for the listeners as well, right? If I'm not mistaken, everyone can try informed.now for a trial period. Is that correct?
Yeah, yeah. So any listener gets a free week to see the power of facts in their own pocket. And there's no credit card commitment, nothing of the sort. You just text the word hello to our toll-free number, which means any Canadian number can text us, any United States number can text us completely free of charge. And you just get a free week just for listening to our conversation with Deepak. The phone number is 844-406-INFO, which is 4636. You just text hello from any number. It's completely free. And you get to see the value and the power of facts back in your palm.
Awesome. And I'm gonna do that myself. And if you want to rewind and get that number down, that's great. We'll have it in the show notes, so you don't have to rewind back and do that. One last question for you. What if, if you could go back, and you're obviously still a young man, but if you could go back to a younger period of your life and give yourself some advice or something, or another way to ask you, maybe just what's a golden nugget you'd like to leave for the audience? What would you tell your younger self, or what would you share with the audience?
Yeah, I think when you're going through it as a young person, you can feel like you're late to something. Like you can feel like you are, I can't get into AI at this point. Everyone's in AI. It's already too late. But then you look back at that time as an older version of yourself and you realize just how early you were, just how early you've been. And if there's a nugget here, that I would tell myself, my younger version of myself, is don't think that you're late. Just don't let that sort of parasite in your mind scream at you and say like, hey, you're late. It's too late to do this. It's too late to do that. Like you have no idea how early you are to almost everything that you start. And of course, we're seeing that now with the whole AI era, with a lot of technological changes, a lot of political changes. You're way earlier to starting anything than you realize. And just don't let that sort of demon voice, right, in your mind say, it's too late to start, it's not worth it. It's worth it. Start now, and you'll thank yourself later, whatever your endeavors are.
Yeah, I love that. I want to piggyback on that a little bit because I started this career, or my second career, at 41. And I meet plenty of entrepreneurs in groups I belong to, networking events, who are doing that in their 50s, 60s, even 70s. They're on to their second or third career. So if you're whatever age, I'm just going to throw 25 out as a random number. If you're 25 thinking you're late, no, no, no. You're only a quarter of the way through your life, right? There's plenty of time. So I love that. I
100%.
love that piece of advice. Yeah, Kira, I really appreciate you being on the Deepak Saini show. There's some great value you provided here. Again, we'll have all the links and everything, and how people can get their free week of informed.now all in the show notes. Yeah, thank you for being on the show.
Deepak, it's been a pleasure, but I can't let you go without you revealing the mystery of why your glasses are
Oh,
orange.
okay, absolutely. I'll tell you this. And a really quick, funny story as well. So of course, being in the health space and the health optimization space, biohacking space, even, I'm always looking to optimize myself. So this, blocking blue light, harmful effects of non-natural blue light. Obviously, we get natural blue light from the sun and et cetera, et cetera. And of course, that changes as the sun sets the spectrum. Um, but it became more in my preview. So this is quite a few years ago now. I went to my from a regular eye checkup, and just to make sure my eyes are healthy. And I asked the optometrist, I'm like, hey, I'm hearing all this noise. Is this like legit, or is this like BS marketing stuff? And they're like, oh, like, and my optometrist was wearing contacts. She's like, oh, when I get home, I take my contacts out, I put on my blue light blocking glasses. And then she went and she got me a sample pair from one of the receptionists, and she had blue light blocking glasses, and she brings it into the office. She turns off the light, she gets her blue light pen and shines through, and you can noticeably see like the amount of blue light going through the lens, like cut in like 80% cut. I realized, or every single person who worked at my optometry office, whether it be the optometrist themselves, the technician, or just the frontline person at the desk, every single one of them has blue light blocking glasses. I'm like, why don't you sell them here? She's like, oh, it's not really popular. People aren't really asking for it. I'm like, well, I'm asking for it. So obviously I have prescription, right? So I had to, find a company, and this is, my preferred brand, and they do sponsor things sometimes. So thank you for the question. But yeah, there's so much non-native light now. I'm in front of a computer screen all day. I'm working, clients are texting me on my phone. There's lights. You go to the grocery store, there's all these artificial lights. So I think it's very important to protect our eyes. That's why I wear these, well, pretty much almost all the time. Now, it is very important to get natural sunlight in our eyes early in the day, but after that, we should be protecting our eyes. So great question. Great question. I appreciate that. And while we're on that note, I'll just say to the audience too, don't forget to check out today's show sponsor at the end, and definitely support their products. And yeah, thank you for listening to the Deepak Saini Show. Remember, exceptional results for the exceptional you. And I'll throw it to J23, who's going to guide us out with some music. Again, Kira, thank you again for being on the show.
Thank you for having me, Deepak.
Bye, everyone. Today's podcast sponsor is Bioptimizers, particularly their Mass Zines product here. I use this every time I have protein-rich meal or a dairy-rich meal. It's a digestive enzyme product that helps break down proteins from meat, and eggs, etc. You're having that big steak, and also dairy products. You're having the cheese, etc. So I'm very sensitive to these dairy products, particularly some of the enzymes in that. So it helps me break it down so my body can actually use it, and helps break down that yummy steak or ribs or chicken or whatever I'm having, so I can actually use the amino acids from that and help digest that food. So Bioptimizers has like 80 products in their line. I'm just talking about one here, Masszymes. There's Gluten Guardian, which I've talked about before if you're sensitive to gluten. They have nootropics, and they also have my favorite brand of Magnesium Breakthrough, that has all 7 forms of magnesium. And I'll talk about that another time. But Masszymes, if you eat meat and you want to get more from your meat, make sure you're digesting it properly and actually get the benefits you want, get those amino acids, then you definitely want to check out Masszymes.
Podcast produced by the Minted Green Company